Hey everybody, it's Book of Katherine. I hope this recording finds you well. We are here on YouTube instead of Twitter, which is great. And I just want to talk to you. I'm about to, I hope, who knows if it'll actually happen, but I'm about to tape Sermon on the Mount. We're finally through chapters 5 and 6, and we're about to start chapter 7. But I really wanted to talk to you about something that I learned that changed a lot of things for me, especially being raised in the Catholic Church. I was taught about this section all the time, and I just, for some reason, I feel like I need to talk to you about this first before I get into chapter 7 of the Sermon on the Mount. Which, by the way, if you just want to hear the Sermon on the Mount read straight through, that's the first thing that I do. You can look it up. It's there on my YouTube channel, just the Sermon on the Mount, without any commentary. So anyway, let's talk about Jesus being tempted. Like, why was he tempted in the desert? It never made any sense to me. I didn't understand the point of it. I was taught all about it being raised Catholic, about how Jesus was sent out into the desert and he fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and then Satan tested him. And I was taught that, and the way it was taught to me made me very scared, kind of like I could never live up to that if I was suffering, well, I could never suffer as much as Jesus did when he went and he fasted. Like, that would always be thrown in our faces. Well, Jesus fasted 40 days and 40 nights. And like, can't you do that? And he suffered. And that's why they held the cross up all the time. They're like, he said they hold the crucifixion up all the time. Such a sign of Judaism and Catholicism. I should have seen it much sooner, but I didn't. Anyway, I mean, if you ever go into a Catholic church, they've kind of toned it down now because parents stopped bringing their kids around all the blood and gore. A number of Catholic churches have taken it down, but the church that I was raised in, the signs of the cross were everywhere, and the missions that I'd go visit up and down California that my parents took me to, the crucifixion is everywhere. There's blood dripping from every single part of that church. It's no wonder that so many kids who are raised Catholic get into horror movies. I don't blame them. They've been raised on it since they were a baby, baptized in it, for heaven's sakes, literally. Anyway, so it was used more as a tool of being like, well, if you think you're suffering, you should suffer more and just suffer, suffer, suffer. That's your lot in life. You're supposed to suffer because Jesus suffered, and how dare you betray God, blah, 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 blah. Gosh, I was so angry when I found out I could talk to the Lord. I mean, I felt so betrayed. Not necessarily by the Catholic Church. I just felt like I'd been betrayed by anyone. It took me a long time before I calmed down and realized, any of the source of it, or I was able to, my brain hadn't gotten big enough. I had to grow up and get my own mind and kind of zoom back and see things and stand from far away. I needed to get healthy first. That's something they said in the New Life Live. I don't even know if they're still taping. I haven't listened to New Life Ministries in years. Oh my goodness. I haven't listened to anything they've done in years and years and years. But I remember I heard one broadcast once, and they said, if you're going to prioritize something, prioritize your mental health first, and then the Lord, and then yourself, and then family, and then then your wife, and then your kids, like this order of priority, which shouldn't even be a question if you're actually walking with Jesus. You can just ask him when to prioritize things day in and day out, and he'll tell you anything. Like, he'll tell you what to eat. He'll tell you, if you get used to talking to him, you can ask him anything you want to ask him day by day. There isn't any question. I mean, there are things that you don't want to really do to anybody. Anyway, so you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. So many people worry about whether or not they're doing things right. And I'm like, just it's really more about, walking and talking with him, or just talking to him and asking him what to do from minute to minute. Anyway, so let's talk about Jesus outside of the fact that he suffered when he went out into the desert. So what is the actual meaning of it all? And especially when that's such a contrast to the Jesus that we see in the book of Revelations, where he's walking around with a sword, and where he says, we're here at the end of Revelations. That's the reason the number 22 keeps coming up. I realized by me saying that, go to the New Jerusalem, go to the New Jerusalem, that's actually in there. That's how the book of Revelation ends, is with calling from like the Holy Spirit, and then the bride, and then everyone who hears the Holy Spirit and the bride will echo that and say, go to the New Jerusalem. So that's the like second to last thing that happens in the book of Revelations. The book of Revelation ends with saying, don't you dare change a word of this or else you'll be cursed. So as far as like the action that it predicts, the last thing that it predicts is that there will be a call to the New Jerusalem to go. And that's really where we're at. So the number 22 keeps cropping up for the 22nd chapter of Revelations. But even so, Revelations in general has this different picture of Jesus more as a warrior. And when the last two chapters, when it talks about the new earth and the new Jerusalem, it's saying that the conquerors will inherit this. Well, Jesus just spent the Sermon on the Mount, his first teaching, saying the meek will inherit the earth, right? Those who are blessed and those who turn the other cheek and those who just stay on their side of the lane. What does that mean, the conquerors? Well, that's because it says there will be a tribulation right before the end. And I think the tribulation started in this last Jubilee of years. There's been 140 Jubilees. Remember, a Jubilee is a set of 50 years. There's been 140 Jubilees since the fall of Adam and Eve. They fell on May 6th. We know that on our calendar. They fell on May 6th, which I believe is the 17th of the second month, I believe. And which is why 17 is the number of destruction. The number 10 is when they began loading Noah's Ark. So 10 and 17 tend to have destructive tendencies as far as, the meaning and symbolism of it. So anyway, so there's been 140 Jubilees. We're at the end of the 140th Jubilee. And that really began ramping up. We can see it in that the last 50 years. All of the earthquakes have been ramping up. The lightning's been ramping up. The storm, the electricity, all these things have just gone right off the scale. And the same thing's been happening on all these other planets. And I think that's the same thing with the tribulation. When we see disasters, they move the disasters. I always think this is an underlying thing, and I've been listening to some of my recordings lately, and I'm like, hey, wait a minute. I'm saying this thing, but I don't know if I've explicitly stated it. I've stated it online all the time, like in writing, but I don't know if I've said it out loud in any of these recordings. The disasters have been moving from east to west. That's because Enoch described the earth as destructive winds are in the east. And that's why it's interesting. People didn't go and live out there for a long time. Like, that's why they lived over in the west where things were better. The destructive winds, the worst place to be is Australia. And we've definitely seen that. They have the most number of locusts. They don't just have locust plagues. They have all the different types of locusts there are all in Australia. It's just anyway, Enoch outlines these destructive winds, and I've done a map. I've actually made a kind of map with, the best I could do with drawing with my tremors. You can always see my tremors when I'm drawing. I have to redo an arrow like 8 times, trying not to let you guys see the tremors, and sometimes I just give up. I get the ones that look super straight to me, I'm like, later on, I'm like, ooh, those are really wiggly, and I do my best for you. So, and you guys definitely support me. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have medical care or even be speaking now. So we're such a good team. So anyway, these destructive winds are in the east. And so slowly but surely patterns start in the east. And then we eventually see them in the west. And it used to take a long time. It used to take years for them to travel over to the west. And now it happens in days. I see something happen in China. And I'm like, oh no, it's going to reach us. And next thing you know, it reaches Europe in just a couple days. And by the end of the week, it's reached the USA. And I've seen things move as quick as a day now. Some things just, for example, the sign of that is these chemical fires. China's been having chemical fires for a while. They've definitely they moved over to the west. They tend to move from Europe. They tend to move from the east, and then in Africa, then Europe, and then down to South America, and then up to the North America, even Canada, and then finally on that the USA. I just think that's because of it predicts that. Enoch predicts that all the way back then. So I could go into why that is. But the fact that there's been so many chemical fires in the USA in the last week, and then there's a giant chemical fire again in China, that means that whole pattern's broken, and it's just there is no more wave that goes from the east to west. We've seen all the kind of disasters that are going to be. Now we're just going to see them hit the earth in succession. It's just a sign that the whole earth, it's not this the birthing contractions are just all over now. It's not just kind of, oh, it started here and it moved down there, and it started here and moved down there. Now it's just the whole earth is contracting in this birth, in this childbirth of being destroyed. So anyway, so I don't know how I got on all that. So anyway, I really wanted to talk to you about this with Jesus and what that actually means and what his suffering was for when he went out there into the garden, and what that has to do with anything outside of the suffering that Catholics were raised with, or Jews were raised with, or any of our religions today that were telling us that suffering is a necessity. And then they point to Jesus and they say, see how he suffered, and that's what God wants us to do, is suffer. Let me go ahead and just allay your fears right now and help chart out the character of God a bit more. So this is something I only figured out in the last few years. Thank you, because of the Book of Katherine, because of your support. And yeah, this is what I finally figured out doing the research and just kind of sitting back and reading it all outside of a religious organization for as long as I've been outside, and just with the Father, and that's it. So this is what it's about. It's not unconnected to the baptism. It has everything to do with the baptism of Jesus before. And also, that's another question. Why did Jesus even have to get baptized if he was the Son of God? And not only the Son of God, if he was Lord, and then why did he have to get baptized? And there's already signs of it, because he already spoke to the leaders in the temple. Like, they saw him as a young child. He had all the signs, like that. That's why we find the Roman records and the Sanhedrin records of sending out questions about this kid Jesus out to Galilee. They actually sent investigators out, not to Galilee. He wasn't living in Galilee at the time. At the time, Jesus was living east of Jerusalem, like on the other side of the Dead Sea, out in what's today, I believe, is called Jordan. So he was living actually out there, which I don't know of anyone that actually says that. So they actually sent somebody out there to do an investigation, and he can never find Jesus. But they interview Mary, they interview Joseph. It's very interesting to learn that Joseph is a pain in the butt, and that he wasn't even there for the birth of Jesus, which makes sense. I mean, men weren't even, I know neither of my parents, I believe the father was in the room when they were born. Like, I think having men in the room is a fairly recent thing, historically speaking. I think that's only been happening in the last 30 years or so, right? Like, hasn't been that long. Anyway, which is great, happens just in time for, vlogging. And I'm sure women are like, thanks, now you bring it in. Now when you got the video camera. Though I think now that I think about it, I think it's personal cameras that actually started the trend. Men didn't want to miss it. Women were like, don't miss the birth of our baby. And so that kind of pushed men to stay in and film it. I think personal cameras, if I think about it, happened at the same time. So anyway, men were like, you're not going to get me out. I'm going to get this on tape, and so we can show it and use it at their wedding when everything, and embarrass them and post it on Facebook. And so everyone has their stuff out there by the time they hit. They're able to go to kindergarten. Everyone's able to look up your birth. So your kindergarten teacher can go see your mom giving birth to you. So the moment you hit kindergarten, or whatever age you are, wherever you are in the world, I don't know if that's kind of a Western joke, I guess. Anyway, so my point is that they had signs that Jesus was God much, much earlier. They were very concerned. They were looking for the Messiah. He was born right when the Messiah was supposed to be born. The priest at the time of the synagogue there, he actually said it. The whole town acknowledged that it was the birth of the new Messiah. There's a reason he had to run off and not stay there in Bethlehem. But the Sanhedrin and the people, the Rabbi Hillel and his followers, and they were all aware. They actually were aware of the prophecies. It was much more public, the text at that time. The 70 books of wisdom hadn't been created until Jesus started speaking. And then they were like, oh, shoot, they're using prophecy to say that he's the Son of God. We better lock it away, or else these families are going to lose all their wealth, and this 10% taxation of your income will stop. And so, of course, it's about money. And so they hid away the books of wisdom, so we don't have if you look up a Jewish library, that they auction off or whatever. It's massive. It's absolutely massive. So what's in the Old Testament, it's the same thing that's in the Tanakh or Torah. And Jesus even says it's a rewriting of history. That's why a lot of things in it don't match up. So you have to kind of like test it all. And that's why you have to talk to the Lord to know what to believe and what not to believe. So I've gone through it. I'm like, okay, this book of Deuteronomy, this is legit. Oh, you can see where they butted in here and changed this here. So you have to just watch for that stuff. So anyway, so there are definitely signs that he was the Son of God. So why did he need to be baptized? Like, did he become the Son of God when he was baptized? Well, why did the angels come down and sing? So this is the deal. This is how it goes. So Jesus was, in flesh form, and he'd been raised up, and he was the Son of God. But then he was about to do his ministry. That's exactly what it was about, doing his ministry. And that is doing, and what his ministry. So we know that Jesus, what his ministry was supposed to do was to go to each of the tribes of Israel. They all lived in their own town. They all sort of inhabited. Same thing happens in Nigeria today. There's like 5 main tribes that live across Nigeria, and they each have like their sector. And that same thing was happening in Judea at the time. There were the 12 tribes of Israel, and they each had sort of the town that they lived in. And one of the last tribes that hadn't been witnessed to was in Galilee. And so that's why there's this whole long history of the word being brought to every single tribe, or the light appearing to them. So what happens is that Jesus is about to say that the kingdom of the Lord is coming. The kingdom of God is coming. Prepare the way. And they all knew what that meant. They were looking for a Messiah. And so the specific thing was bringing the word of God. He brought healing and to witness and say that the kingdom has come, and to fulfill the law, which was to have the Messiah be killed, then conquer death, and then eventually there'd be a tribulation, and then the first apocalypse, or I guess you could call it the second apocalypse if you want to call it, because you could say the first apocalypse was the flood, and then the second apocalypse happened when the sun stood still. There's this thing we call the Dark Ages, of volcanic sulfur everywhere. Just, they call it the worst year to be alive. Ton of stuff went down, and then the millennium of Christ was born after that. So around the year 840 AD to 1840 AD, and then Satan is released again, and then the end of the world begins. The final tribulation begins before everything ends. So what happened here is that Jesus is about to go and do all of that witnessing, which would require a tremendous amount of healing. What he does then is he does a lot of healing. His job is to not break any of the laws there, and not to violate any of the laws, so that when he is killed, he's innocent. Like, you hear so much about how the Pharisees and those who are questioning him push him constantly, try to catch him so that he breaks the law. The whole point is that he's supposed to die an innocent man, and not only that is he innocent, but he's the blood of God. So not just innocent in the eyes of the Lord and according to the natural law, but innocent according to Rome's law, and also innocent according to the Sanhedrin law. So it's both of those together. And so what the testing, the extra, so when he's baptized, that's first of all, it punctuates the beginning of his ministry. Things move from John the Baptist over to Jesus. And so the disciples of John the Baptist, who said he came to prepare the way, now the Messiah is here. Everyone sees that John the Baptist announces him. And so the Messiah, and it's a witness to everyone. So even the disciples are helping baptize as well. And then Jesus leaves and heads north again. And after he's baptized, and this voice comes out and says, "This is my son with whom I'm well pleased." It's interesting that happens. And for so long after, the disciples are still saying, "Are you the Elijah? Are you this?" It takes like so long for anyone to actually believe that he's the Son of God, his own people. And he never directly tells them that. He doesn't say any of that until they declare it. So that's why you hear him asked so often, "Who do you say that I am?" He doesn't push anyone. It's a demonstration of what the Book of Remembrance said, which is that the Messiah, or they call him Moshe, Moshe. They say Moshe doesn't, push you. He's gentle. He's gentle. He's gentle. He waits for you to come to him. And so Jesus isn't like, "I'm the Son of God." You see that in contrast, you see that in Paul. Paul rants and raves like an adolescent, prepubescent teenager who's used to getting his way. Oh, don't you think I'm this? Oh, don't you? I don't know the mind of God. He's so argumentative, and that's why churches only study him. It's such a sign. He's not actually a real apostle. So anyway, so the point of the Spirit coming down in this baptism is so that Jesus is given tremendous power, and the test is, okay, are you going to use that power to destroy everything? Jesus has the power to end the world. He has the power. Now this extraordinary amount of power has been given to him. It's like, think of it as magic, as if someone just gave him an extra charge of magic, like put two sockets on either side of him and went zzz, and then he became boom, like the Hulk, and suddenly he has all this magic. And the test is all about whether or not he uses it to enact justice, or whether or not he does what he's about to say, which is he turns the other cheek and he fulfills the promise that he would be a peacemaker. And so he turns the other cheek. And so what he does is he goes out into the desert with all of this power all over him, and he knows the temptation is coming. And what's very interesting is that it says that Jesus chose he chose fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, which is otherworldly. It's part of what this extra power had been heaped upon him that kind of overruns his human body. And what happens is that he's able to fast 40 days and 40 nights, which makes him rely on the Spirit as much as possible instead of the body that has death in it. So he's like fully leaning on this. Instead of the broken flesh, he's leaning fully heavily on the Holy Spirit and the Spirit, and leaning in the power that he has. And he uses that power instead to weaken his body so that he's fully reliant on his Spirit. Like he's as much of a Godhead as he's just fully sitting there flexing. And that's very interesting, because that's the point. It's supposed to be the point of fasting, is that, well, if you don't have food, then your concentration becomes how to survive. And if you're in the desert, who can you learn on? Who can you lean on? And so it really makes you start screaming out to the Lord. It really makes you start drawing closer to the Father. And for him, it draws closer to his power, so that when Satan comes, can you imagine how much Jesus, the Lord, wants to hurt Satan and smack him around now that you're down on earth and have been watching what Satan's done to your chosen people for that many years, for 30 years or whatever? I mean, I'd have a hard time not killing Satan in that moment. And that's the point. That's the test, is not that if you read the words, it doesn't sound like Satan tested him much. He asked 3 questions. The test is just being in the presence of Jesus, period, and not getting killed. And that's the greatest test of all, is that Satan in his face saying, you could turn all these loaves of bread, into food. Why don't you do it? And he's like, man doesn't live on bread alone. And then he says, oh, you could jump off and you won't get hurt. The angels will catch you. And Jesus is like, you shouldn't test the Lord God. You shouldn't test him. You shouldn't do it just to prove he's God, or just, and he's like, never test the Lord your God. And then Satan takes him up to Herod's temple, which I find is very fascinating. He takes him to the hub. It makes so much more sense when you read the records from that there. If you read the Archco volume and the texts that are in there, it is absolutely, it draws you such a clearer picture of what the hell went down. And it was this massive structure, and it had raised the temple that the Lord built through Zerubbabel, and just raised down the actual mountain. It was like kind of the first cement or pavement, if you want to think about it. It was not built onto the mountain that the Lord made. Instead, it raised everything down, which means bulldozed it all, and then built this flat surface so that immense marketplaces could be made. Now, Jesus would know that Satan fell because of buying and selling, and Satan's put him up there in Herod's temple and showed him this massive stoa that was there, this huge marketplace that took up a third of the Temple Mount. And Satan was like gloating and saying, see, not only did I get buying and selling to be big, not only did I get it to be King's Road running all three, I took this putting of your children at the navel of humanity. I went ahead and made them buyers and sellers. And not only have I made them, do this and this and this, but I've actually got, look what they're doing. They actually turned your Temple Mount they actually turned a place of your worship into a marketplace. And the temptation was for Jesus not to take this heaping of power and use it for any kind of destruction. He was not there to enact justice. I mean, he was there. Satan wanted him to break the promise of 7,000 years that he'd given Adam. He promised Adam, I'll give you a whole week more. I'll give you a whole week more. I'll give you a covenant of a whole week where you get to go on and live out. And that's why Noah's Ark, that's why humanity was saved in Noah's Ark. But it just must have been so hard for Jesus just not to bring down a great bolt of lightning and just end everything. That was the test. And for him to absolutely do absolutely nothing, turn the other cheek and just quote it back, knowing and seeing everything. And Satan knew this is probably where you're going to die. I think there were prophecies that he would die there. And it was, hold on. Sorry, that was my round of medicine. So, took years to get that time down, like exactly when to do each round and to put what in it. And you guys who are chronically ill on rounds of meds, you guys absolutely know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I'm sorry about that. So, I have taken my round of meds. All right, so continuing on. So, my point is that Jesus had that heaping of power so that he could go and heal and also kind of put up with his own people, being as stubborn as they were. You should read Exodus sometime and Deuteronomy and find out how the Lord talks about the children of Israel. He has some pretty choice words. It's pretty hysterical when you read you actually read the Old Testament, you read through and you find out about the children of Israel. It's not like he just all of a sudden kicked them out of Judea or kicked them out of Israel or got them out of Palestine. He kept giving warnings. He'd be like, don't do this. Please come back to me. Please don't worship other gods. All right, fine, you did it. All right, I'm going to have you captured by the Philistines for 18 years. Okay, come back. All right, oh no, you fell away again. Okay, I'm going to send fire this time, and then a pillar of fire. They always talk about Sodom and Gomorrah as the big pillar of fire. It ain't the only pillar of fire moment. Like, there's other pillar of fire moments. They found melted glass in these other cities where big things of fire came down on Israel. It's just no one wants to talk about it because it's the children of Israel. They're like there's some kind of saint or something. Like, judgment happens all across the world. We've seen all the pagan civilizations in Mazatlan and North America. These things in Chile, Peru, the things that they did and the blood sacrifices they did. Yep, the Lord would just shake a mountain and cover them up. 10,000 would die and be buried instantaneously. It's not like judgments haven't happened. You look over where the settlement wasn't. You're like, why didn't the mountain shake there? No, a mountain shakes and covers up like a specific tribe or nothing's on accident. It's not like the Judaism is the only one that is judged, but it's not like they're without judgment either. So there's plenty of warnings. The Lord takes so long to warn us, and that's why there's been 50 years of warnings for this. It's not climate change, it's the apocalypse. That's a lie that it's climate change. Anyway, so that's a long thing. My point is that Jesus got this heaping power to go heal, to go and be a ministry, and then to be able to handle dying, like to be able to actually make it to the point of death and actually make it there. And so that's what this immense power was given to him. But his job and his goal was to be, to not violate any of their laws, any of man, so that he died innocent in every single law book there was. And so Satan tried to get him to break that and try to get him to act outside of that. And that's why Satan doesn't try a whole lot. Satan has to preserve his energy. That's one of the things that you should understand about Satan. when he's kicked out of heaven, that means he doesn't have access. Angels have access. The 2/3 that survived that were dedicated Lord, they still have access to the kingdom of heaven. And you have to think of the kingdom of heaven as this like big battery charger where that's where life is. And for angels, their source of life is heaven. Their source of life is they don't have the tree of life. They don't need the tree of life. They have heaven. They go to heaven. It's this great recharging. That's where their energy comes from. That's where their power comes from. And then Satan got kicked out of heaven. So he has had to last all this time so that you see him act in very, very minimal ways. And it's almost like the things that he does is to learn how much of a punishment it's going to get him, which is why he just relies on temptation and he relies on deception and trying to get others to act against their only interest so that the punishment comes on the others instead of him. So you kind of read about that in the book of Enoch when 200 angels come together and decide that they're going to go ahead and rape all these human women, breaking the laws of heaven. And one of the angels says, no, I'm not going to do that. And they sit on the side and they teach the woman witchcraft instead, so that he gets less of a sentence than the others who are actually raping the woman, so that he doesn't violate the law. So he kind of does that to get, if you think about it, he's like, I'm not going to get 20 to life. I'm just going to go ahead and do the petty crime and make sure that that gets me off with less time. So the angels are calculating. They know the natural law. And so is Judaism. So many people, so many tribes in Judaism today, so many sects of Judaism, they know the actual natural law. And so they go, like, for example, is the Munich Security Conference. They meet on exactly the opening of the 12th month, the first 3 days of the 12th month. They do that on purpose so that they're in line with the Holy Calendar. So many, even the fashion shows, the Fashion Week shows, everything that Jesus wore in Judaism, like don't focus on fashions. The fashion shows, actually fashion weeks, they actually happen on these new months. They actually happen right when a new month starts. But part of the reason that the fallen angels do that and those who have the calendar do that is so that they're violating as few laws, so that when they do violate a law, they try to get it so that, kind of like, when gangsters are on the side of the street, they try to get they take the youngest kid that doesn't know any better to go do it. Like they hand them the gun and they say, go murder. And so that kid gets off with a lighter sentence. And so the gangster doesn't get the punishment. They don't have to go to jail. They don't get life. You'll notice, if you start watching for it, you'll notice that that's constantly what Satan's doing. They'll offer up things and they'll offer you a big plate of fruit that's poisoned, and they'll say, oh, here, or they'll offer you money, ooh, you can have money. And then you have to choose to be greedy. You have to choose money over God. They don't force you into it or enslave you into it. And by doing that, by letting you take on the guilt, then they avoid punishment themselves. So that's part of the reason Satan doesn't push it. And that's part of the reason Satan just tempts him 3 times and just does a single sentence and then doesn't push it any further. And then from then on, it's not Satan who shows up doing anything. Like, Satan's not there at the crucifixion, is it? It is actually the people that Jesus was born from, his own people that he grew up with and who he was raised by. Those are the people that have him slaughtered. Slaughtered. They'd rather have a murderer than him, even though they know he hasn't broken any of the laws. And so that's my point, is that in the end, what I'm trying to say is that, the reason that he's tempted is to show, for Jesus to make sure and show to everyone that he's not there to conquer. He's not there to conquer. He's not there to end creation. It's a very big temptation. That's the temptation, is to end the world before it's supposed to be ended. It still has, the Lord said way back with Adam that I'm going to send someone at 5,500 at 5.5 days. And that's exactly when Jesus arrives. 5,500 years after the fall is when Jesus arrives. Well, it must have been very tempting to just end it all or burn it all, or even just burn, Judea off the map. It's in the middle of Roman slavery, so everyone is slave. And Herod's temple, by the way, the amount of justice that Jesus must have wanted to do, because Herod's temple was built on the back of Jews. They enslaved 10,000 Jews and made them drag everything together. People talk about slaves building the Egyptian temples and the Egyptian pyramids. can you imagine what it must have taken for everyone back then, both Jew and Gentile alike, to say, oh my gosh, Herod's temple is by far the greatest structure on earth when the pyramids were right on the other side of the Red Sea? Can you imagine how big it must have been and how desirous Jesus must have wanted to just melt it all into a little itty bitty pebble? And later on, that happened later, like the Lord did it through other means. But Jesus was like, no, that's not my job. My job here is peace and healing. And so that was the temptation, is not to be a conqueror, not to use all of the powers that he's used to, not to create anything, not to do this, but to do one thing, which is to be a peacemaker. That is what all the prophecies said. That's why Jesus says, I'm here to fulfill the law, not to change the law, but to fulfill it. And that was the temptation, was to not fulfill the law and not be a peacemaker, but be an arm of justice. And he didn't. He chose to be a peacemaker instead, even when he had all this power on him, and thereby able to heal as many people he did and bring peace so that he would be blameless when he was slaughtered by his own people. Does that make sense? So that was what the whole baptism and the temptation in the desert, that's what all of that was about. It was not about him suddenly becoming Messiah. It was giving him the power for all the healing to kind of tip the scales. But that, of course, would be even harder when you have that much power at your hand to actually not use it, for him to actually hold back and do everything that he teach. Everything he taught, he actually did. He lived it out in front of everybody. So I just hope that explains some things away. It has anything to do with you guys. It doesn't have to do with you or the kind of suffering that the Lord expects you to do. Yes, we are here at the end of the tribulation. And by the way, that's the whole point of Revelations, is that Jesus already conquered death. And after Jesus conquers death, then here at the end of the age, after the millennium of Christ, like in the book of Revelations, that's why you meet a whole new Jesus in the book of Revelations. That's why you meet a whole new Jesus, because he's conquered death. He's fulfilled all of the prophecies about being a peacemaker and coming and riding the donkey in and bringing the fish is the, the coin from the fish's mouth. All these, they say 300 prophecies in the Old Testament. There's way more than that. There are way more prophecies than that in this great Jewish Bible, Jewish library that they have that isn't included in the Old Testament or the New Testament. There's just so many. And he came there to fulfill those. And now he's saying, here at the end of days, he's saying the conquerors will inherit. So how are you supposed to be a conqueror? And of course, the millennium of Christ started with war. Like the first crusade, of course, Germany went and twisted it. So people think the millennium of Christ was supposed to be something perfect. And I'm like, he didn't say he ended sin. He just tied up the deceiver. So, there ended up being less death on the whole. It took a full 1,000 years for mankind to figure out how to live peaceably amongst each other. Like it took forever to actually learn what the natural laws were, if that makes sense. Like to actually treat women the way that Jesus treated women, to all of that. I read the book of Judith. Women are quite fierce. The women that are in the scriptures that have been hidden away as secret and wisdom and just for the high holy ones, that's where all the women are. And you want a perfect example of how the Lord sees women? Well, Deborah. Look up Deborah the prophet. She was one of the judges. She ruled the ancient tribe of Judea when back in Israel, before they had King David, before they asked for a king. She was one of the judges. She was one of the leaders, what today we would call a queen. So she was the one that answered for the Lord. So, women are definitely in the Bible, even if people want to kick them out and want to belittle them. It's just all part of the tribulation. So that's why we're conquerors here at the end, is because we're in the middle of a great tribulation that really started these last 50 years, especially took off in the last 30 years. But if you read the records back in the day, same thing happened the first time the Messiah came. That 30 years, that's the whole reason Rome sent Pilate, was because things had been so crazy in Jerusalem and Judea for 30 years that they finally sent him going, we're just going to need a stronger hand down there. And the governor was like, good riddance, I'm out of here. Good luck with you. And then you even learn that it's so interesting. Times were so similar back then to how they are now when you hear about it, what it was like to be a governor and how how it seemed like it was such a mighty position, but in the end, it was just another way for Rome and for Judea to get more money off of you. Like there was no such thing as a sweet position, sweet position or a higher upper power position. It was just as difficult as is today. Very few people have it easy. It's just not the way things were written. It won't be easy until we're in Eden again, which, by the way, is in the New Jerusalem. It's where the tree of life is. That's the eternal life. Like if eternal life is available in the New Jerusalem, there is no death there. That's why there are no tears, because the tree of life is there. So going back there is returning to way things were in Eden. So anyway, so I hope that helps understanding why Jesus was tested. It doesn't have to do with you or I. It has to do with the fulfillment of the scriptures and a testing so that we know that it wasn't easy and that there's this dedication that the Lord was going to go through for us to make sure that he's a peacemaker, even when it wasn't easy. And basically to fulfill the law. It doesn't have anything to do with you or I or being holy when we suffer. That's not what it's about at all. So anyway, I hope that helps you. Right after Jesus is tested, he chose to do the fasting for 40 days and 40 nights so that he'd be ready for Satan. So he'd be more focused on the Lord. And right after he's done with that testing, he goes home, he goes to Nazareth, he goes to a synagogue, and he just picks up. They loved hearing him speak. He just picks up something and he says, "This has been fulfilled today." And he reads out this like prophecy from Isaiah, and he's like, "You just watched it be fulfilled." And the moment he says that, like literally the moment he starts his ministry, the moment he says, "Okay, a prophet," the moment he begins fulfilling the law in public, like not off in private in a desert, the moment he starts fulfilling the law is the instant his own people turn on him. The instant they all turn on him, and they had loved him the moment before, and then they didn't love him the next minute, which is why there's so much that Jesus teaches about your own family will turn your back on you. I saw some ridiculously awful shill account. I hate shill accounts. Try and say like, "Oh, I didn't know anyone that's ever been, rejected because they followed Jesus." And I'm like, such a liar. Like Satan is everywhere. They're like, "If you're kind, you're kind." And I'm like, I hate that that word kind. I hate that the liar loves to use the word kind, because that's what sheep are, right? That's what slaves are. Aren't all slaves kind when they're in bondage, when they got chains around their necks and chains around their wrists and they're being dragged along? Slaves are certainly kind. They're like, "Yes, massa, no massa, no," right? Like they're kind, they're always like scared of every little hand. They're kind. That is totally different. No, Jesus will ask you to do things that no one thinks is popular. Like not no one, but the people that you grew up with, they're going to think that you are crazy, and they will say things and they will do things, or they'll snickle behind your back. And then you go out with the Lord, and then he brings you into the land of wonder and prosperity and love, and not prosperity like gold, but other kind of prosperity. Like yesterday, I got out of the house and I got to see these wonderful bush, like these reeds blowing in the wind. For someone who has to stare at a white wall for almost all day, every day for most of her life, like not able to even see out a window because the light is like too unbearable to handle. It gives migraines. You know what it's like to like see something blow in the wind, something natural just blow in the wind. It feels like you've just been, I don't even know how to equate it to other normal people who are healthy. It feels, I guess, supposedly like someone gives you a luxury car or something for your birthday, or not for your birthday, for nothing. You didn't expect it. It feels like the most generous and abundant gift. That's what walking with Jesus is like. It just changes, because all of a sudden you're talking to the one who created everything, and you don't. And also, by the way, that's the one thing no one can take away from you, and people really hate that. The fallen really hate that, when what you have they can't touch and they can't take away from you. When they know that even death can't touch you, that's a very powerful position to be living your life from. And of course, Satan goes after the ones who are alive. He doesn't bother with the ones who are dead. So, be proud. Don't go looking for trouble. I mean, read the Sermon on the Mount. Like, I still have yet to hear someone really use Jesus, like talk about Jesus when they make arguments or go out there. And I just see that's all they really put out there today and push is people arguing. And that's turn the other cheek. Really, really. All right, love you guys, and search for the New Jerusalem. And I'm so glad you're enjoying the movie, the book of Catherine and the Mormon Star. I'm so glad you're enjoying that. That's worldwide now, and in not long, it's worldwide now, and I'm so glad that you guys are enjoying it. Oh, I'm so glad. All right, love you guys. Talk to you later. Bye. Oh, and if you'd like to support and help with the medical bills and just support this, just support me. There's a link in the description, just in my PayPal link, and you can pay whatever you want. We were doing $1 a month if you want, but it's up to you. I will never take any of your money automatically. It's just if you want to. So, and it helps tremendously, whatever amount. It just really, it makes such a difference in my life. Okay. Love you guys so much. Bye.